Hey everybody, and welcome back to the channel. In this video we're going to be looking at a couple of AGP cards that I picked up recently. I actually purchased them in two lots, and I wasn't actually looking for an AGP card. I was actually looking for a PCI Express card, a NVIDIA GeForce GTX card to be exact. But the seller happened to open up a drawer with a couple of interesting AGP cards inside, so we'll take a look at those. So we have a fine selection of both NVIDIA and ATI cards. Not all of them are equally spectacular. There are even a couple of really crappy cards in there, but also a couple of gems that I would like to discuss here in this video. So we have a wide array of AGP cards ranging from the end of 1999 all the way up to 2004-ish. So yeah, goal of this video is to see how they perform in an Athlon XP or an Athlon 64 Windows XP setting, and just see how well they perform in terms of games and synthetic benchmarks. So that's the goal of this video. So let's kick things off by taking a look at all of these cards here. So yeah, like I said, a really diverse set of cards. We have a really old card here, like this TNT2 card, NVIDIA TNT2 from 1999, the WinFast 3D. We also have a really crappy card like this NVIDIA FX 5200, especially this one with the 64-bit memory bus. But we also have some really cool cards, like for example this GeForce 4 Ti 4600, a real flagship card from NVIDIA. So yeah, really interesting to have found this one. These are pretty rare. We also have some more generic ones like this GeForce 6200, but let's go over all of them and see what we have. Now, the first card we're going to be looking at is the GeForce 256. Now, this was the original GeForce released at the end of 1999, beginning 2000. Sometimes referred to as the world's first GPU, and it offered the users a nice upgrade path from Riva TNT2 cards or 3DFX Voodoo cards. It was still being produced when its successor, the GeForce 2 card, came out, meaning that it had a very long lifespan. And this is a pretty late model from MSI, the MS808009. Its main competitors were the ATI Rage 128 Pro and the 3DFX Voodoo 3 and S3 Savage 2000. Next up, we have the GeForce 4 Ti 4600, and this card alone was actually worth the purchase because this is the flagship GeForce 4 card. It actually will replace the GeForce 3 Ti 500. It is the performance tier card from the GeForce 4 series, released together with the entry-level low-tier GeForce 4 MX series. After this card, NVIDIA also released a Ti 4200, which was more of a mid-tier card. This is actually one of the fastest cards when it came out, a real flagship product. Now, much to my surprise, this contains a compact sticker, meaning that this actual card came from a compact computer. I have no idea which one, but these cards are getting extremely difficult to find, and if you look them up on eBay, they ask ridiculous prices for them. So perhaps finding an old compact computer might be the best way of finding one. The main competitors were the ATI 8500. Now, the GeForce 4 Ti 4200 is, as I already mentioned, the mid-tier card from the NVIDIA GeForce 4 series. It was released a bit later than the Ti 4600, and that's because NVIDIA wanted to get rid of some old GeForce 3 stock. It is a very capable card for gaming, costs about half the price of a Ti 4600 and gives adequate performance. This card here is from Medion, the German big retailer known for the Aldi stores. So this one probably came from one of those Medion PCs. There were two revisions of this card, one which uses the same core as a Ti 4600, which uses an AGP 4X interface, but this one has the AGP 8X interface based on the NV28 chip. This is a really good overclocker and got really good reviews as a really decent gaming card for a really attractive price. The next card that we have is the NVIDIA FX 5200 Ultra. And with this one, we entered some controversial territory because the FX series, which was the successor of the GeForce 4, isn't considered to be NVIDIA's most best GPUs. I mean, they didn't perform all that great. They had lots of issues and they were plagued with lots of different models with different clock speeds, different memory bus sizes, different memory sizes. So it was just one big mess. Now this FX 5200 Ultra performs relatively well because of its slightly higher clock speed and 128-bit memory bus, and the fact that it also supports DirectX 9 was a big selling point. Now the same cannot be said by this FX 5200 non-Ultra version, because this one here is crippled by a 64-bit memory bus. Now, a lot of people say that this kind of practices made a bad card even worse, and they are absolutely right, because this basically drops your performance in half when you have a video card like this. It was very cheap to make, and a lot of OEMs started using these FX 5200 chips because that means they could slap on a sticker that says stuff like GeForce, 128 megabytes, DirectX 9, DDR memory, lots of marketing gimmicks that sold PCs but left the consumer with a crippled video card. Next up is the GeForce 6200, the AGP version, because this GeForce 6200 chip was initially released as a PCI Express card. It was a low budget offering where the PCI Express versions had a feature called Turbo Cache, which would allow the video card to use system memory via the PCI Express interface. Now, this AGP version was released after the PCI Express version in the beginning of 2005. Its main competitor was the Radeon 9800 SE. And the cool thing about this is that this 9200 card could be soft modded by an application like Rivet Tuner to enable additional pipelines, effectively turning this GeForce 6200 into an GeForce 6600. So that might be an interesting video to explore later. Next up, we have the single ATI offering here in this batch, which is the ATI Radeon 9100. Now, this was a budget offering from ATI for those that didn't want to spend hundreds of dollars on something like a Radeon 9700 Pro. And basically, if you were happy with kind of low resolutions and you didn't need anti-aliasing and stuff like that, you were good to go with a card like this. It did have a short lifespan, but okay if you were on a budget. Otherwise, it would have been better to go for like a 9500 Pro or even a 9700 Pro, as this card here has no DirectX 9 support, and as it came into the market pretty late, it would have a very short lifespan. Now, the following AGP cards didn't make the cut in terms of benchmarking because they were either too old or not relevant. For example, this Radeon 7000 here from 2001, not really a big 3D performer. It was far inferior to the GeForce 2 MX, which was also released in the same era. So yeah, not really a really good card. Another card that we won't be using is this Riva TNT2 card from WinFast, the 3DS 322. So yeah, this is a really nice card, in fact, for late 1990s PCs, but ultimately, I mean, it wouldn't be a fair comparison to stack this up against the GeForce 2 and the GeForce 4 cards. Another card that was in the batch was this S3 card, the S3 Verge GX2. This was one of the last S3 Verge chips that was produced. I don't know a whole lot about it, so it might deserve its own video. I don't have any high expectations from this card, but again, it wouldn't be fair to compare this against a GeForce 4 Ti 4600, so we're not going to be using this card in the tests. So how are we going to be testing these AGP cards? Well, I have set up two systems here. One is based off of an Athlon XP CPU, which is this one right here, the XP 2400 Plus, and also have an AMD 64 based system, which is the Athlon 64 3000 Plus here. And we're going to be using these two systems just to see how the AGP cards compare. And I would also like to see how the various GPUs scale in terms of CPU. For example, if I put one of the GPUs in this Athlon XP 2400 Plus versus putting them in the system with the AMD Athlon 64 3000 Plus, which is a faster CPU, we just want to see what kind of additional performance we can get out of certain GPUs. Now, both systems are obviously running Windows XP, which is going to be the operating system of choice in order to run some cool games here. We're going to be installing the NVIDIA drivers. I've opted for the 81.98 version, which should support all of the NVIDIA cards mentioned here, except perhaps for the GeForce 256, which is a substantially older card. Now, installing the NVIDIA drivers is pretty straightforward. We need to restart our computer, and then afterwards, if we go into the display properties, go into settings advanced, we should have a GeForce tab here, which should identify our card. In this case, it's the FX 5200. And if we go into the performance and quality settings, which is one of the menus here on the left, you can see that we can configure stuff like anti-aliasing and isotropic filtering, and we need to turn off the vertical sync. This will be application controlled by default, so we need to switch that off before we do any type of benchmarking. Now, I always say that no serious benchmarking video should forget to include Quake 3 Arena. So, I mean, all of the GPUs in this test are perfectly capable of running Quake 3, as this is a 1999 game, but we do see some differences here between the low-spec GPUs like the GeForce 256, the Radeon 7000, and I've also added the GeForce 2 MX200 in the mix here, just to show the difference with the newer cards. But even with the newer cards, there is a substantial difference in the higher resolution between the GeForce 4 Ti versions and, for example, the FX 5200 or the GeForce 6200. Now, another old game that I wanted to use as a benchmark was Colin McRae Rally 2. And with this game, we can go with very low settings, 800 by 600, low detail, and see how the lower spec GPUs will fare on this game. We will also bump up the resolution while still keeping a low detail, just to see how the lower spec GPUs will handle the higher resolution. And then finally, we will bump up the resolution and the detail to really stress test the GPUs on this 2000 game. I mean, most high-end GPUs should be able to handle this resolution and setting just fine. So let's take a look at the results, and we'll start with showing the low resolution, low detail. So a card like the GeForce 256 is able to do 80 plus FPS on this low resolution, as is all of the other cards, obviously. But as soon as you bump up the resolution, you will see that the lower spec cards like the GeForce 256 and the FX 5200 drop off substantially. If we bump up the resolution even higher, we see the same thing. Now, obviously, every card will show a drop off as you increase the resolution. That's perfectly fine. But it is the amount of degradation that you will see that is really telling on the quality of the card. For example, the GeForce 256 here went from 84 to 32. Now that's roughly a 60% decrease. We see the same thing with the FX 5200. The other ones are a bit better, but the GeForce Ti 4600 and 4200 only see a 30% decrease. Now, as we increase the detail but lower the resolution, another thing becomes obvious. The lower spec cards actually see an increase in FPS. For example, the GeForce 256 went from 32 to 47, the FX 5200 went from 32 to 46, while all of the other cards again decreased the FPS, meaning that they were able to maintain a high level of FPS in the higher resolutions. And as we continue bumping up the resolution with the high detail, we can see clearly that the TI 4600 and 4200 are the clear winners. The GeForce 6200 and Radeon 9100 are able to cling on a little bit, but the rest is falling behind rapidly. Just to show you what that means in actual gameplay, here we can see one of the lower spec cards with high resolution, high detail, barely able to maintain 30 FPS, and that makes up for a really choppy gameplay, whereas for example here the TI 4600 at the same resolution and the same detail is able to run at about 50-60 FPS. So another thing I wanted to briefly cover was CPU scaling, just how much does the CPU has an effect on the GPU performance. And as you can see, it's only basically on the TI 4600 and 4200 that we see the benefit of a beefier CPU. I mean, all of the other lower end cards are already throttling on the GPU level, so increasing the CPU doesn't really have much of an effect. I also wanted to include a more modern game, and for that I opted for this one, Need for Speed Underground from 2003. Now this game also has lots of graphic options we can play with, from 800 by 600 low detail, which should be capable for any GPU to run. I mean, I can imagine back in the day you would be pretty happy even with low settings like this. I mean, this is a really great game. The visuals are really good, especially if you bump up the resolution and the detail. So for example, here we are already running in a higher resolution, still low detail, but you can see that this video card here that it's currently running, I think it's the FX 5200, is lagging a bit. So we can play with different resolutions and different detail settings. For example, if we lower the resolution and even with high detail, typically the lower end cards will be able to get around 30 FPS on a game like this, but it's a lot more demanding than the Colin McRae Rally 2 that we saw earlier, so that's why I included it in this test, just to really stress test the GPUs with higher resolution and high detail. For example, here we're at 1280 by 1024, high detail, and yeah, the lower end cards will really struggle with this. And there's even an ultra high detail mode that you can enable, which includes light trails and motion blurring, which is currently not enabled here. But you can see that we're barely hitting 20 FPS right now with this card, so we're definitely going to be needing a better GPU for this. And just for the fun of it, let's enable ultra high settings. So this includes car reflection update rate, the light trails, and the motion blur. And let's see how this particular card is doing with these settings. And it's not looking particularly good. I mean, we're barely hitting 10 FPS. This looks more like a PowerPoint presentation than it does an actual video game. And if we put in our GeForce 4 Ti 4600, for example, with Ultra Max setting, high resolution, we can see that it hits 30 to 40 frames without any issue. So yeah, great way to test the various GPUs, a lot more demanding than Colin McRae. So let's load up our little graph here and see what we have tested. So I have tested the various resolution, both in medium and high, and let's see what we come up with. So yeah, the GeForce 256 is definitely struggling with this game, but the GeForce TI 4600 and 4200 have no issue playing this game even at extreme high resolutions and details. The FX 5200 Ultra is lagging a bit, and the FX 5200 with the 64-bit memory bus is definitely not playable in high resolution, high detail on a game like this. The GeForce 6200 is running a tad faster than the FX 5200 Ultra, and the Radeon 9100 is also pretty much in the same ballpark. I also ran a lot of benchmarks on it from the 3D Mark suite, but I'm going to show that in a second part of this video because we've already reached the 20-minute mark. So I basically ran a whole bunch of tests on the two computers using all of these cards, and I've collected all of the data, so I'm just going to process that a little bit and give you some insights on how these GPUs perform on the two systems using these synthetic benchmarks and what we can learn from that. And with that said, I really hope you've enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider liking the video, giving it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so, hit the notification bell to be informed of new videos coming up on the channel, leave a comment in the comment section below if you want to, and I really hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye, take care.